We begin tonight with more on that breaking news in southwest Portland. Dozens of people lost their homes this morning when fire tore through an old apartment building. It started around 10 this morning. The building still smoldering right now. Our cameras were rolling as an explosion ripped through the building. Did you see that? A firefighter was hurt by flying glass but able to go back to work. Here's another look at it. It appears to be a flashover. That's where the heat becomes so intense inside that the flames shoot through the building, blowing out windows on the 4th floor there. We wanted to know more about the building that now precariously stands at 1410 Southwest Taylor, so we started digging. According to Portland records, the May Apartments building was built back in 1910, and its walls are made of bricks that are not reinforced by steel, which means during a fire, everything can get very hot and then simply collapse. And that's why fire crews quickly fell back after getting everyone out of the building. City records show the building last sold in 2004 for $395,000. Its market value today is listed at roughly $6 million. In December of 2022, some residents in the building complained about leaks and mold and mildew, missing smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and other issues. The city sent an inspector who did not find any of those issues, but did find others. The city told the owner to fix things up. They did not, so they were fined. Then yesterday, I kid you not, yesterday, the city inspector went there and followed up, and most of those issues were fixed. This is a copy of the inspection. The sentences that are lined through were fixed, most everything on the list. They included a fire door being propped open, a window that led to a fire escape being covered or blocked. The city did add 4 new violations, by the way, including missing emergency lights in a laundry area, and the laundry room fire extinguisher had an expired testing and certification level. Now, it's going to likely take a while for experts to figure out what sparked the fire, but witnesses like Terry Blanchard first saw the flames coming from the 3rd floor.
We're sitting on the backside in our van, and
right next to the building that's burning?
Right behind the building. We were coming up, what's that road? Coming up that road, and then we saw the flames shooting out on the 3rd floor on just the one side.
And she said it looked amazing. The inferno had a huge impact on the Goose Hollow neighborhood of southwest Portland. PGE shut off power for safety, which sent a lot of folks outside to see what was happening. The billowing smoke was visible for miles. The other big impact, no streetlights. This is the intersection behind Lincoln High School. And of course, the biggest impact is on those who lived in that apartment building. I'm told that because of the age of the building, it had no sprinklers. There's still a question of whether the smoke alarms went off or not. One resident told us it was confusing trying to figure out what was going on.
I was getting up and the fire alarm had not yet gone off, but there was some other alarm going off, but I didn't pay any attention to it because we've had a problem with the fire alarm going off and nothing happens. So, then I heard a lot of commotion. I looked out the window, but I didn't think all of this was for us for some reason. And so, but I heard commotion in the hall too. So I went and looked out the door, and it was dark and smoky. So I closed the door and I went to the fire escape.
Which was a very smart move, and firefighters helped her down. We still have crews on the scene right now, and we'll have continuing coverage as firefighters put out hot spots and check the building's integrity. We'll have more coming up at 6:30. Let's move on to some other news now. Over the weekend, Saturday to be exact, the Oregonian published a story that we think is worth your time. Oregonian journalist Hillary Borud reports that officials with the Democratic Party of Oregon knowingly filed a false report about the source of a huge campaign contribution that came in last year. Last October, during the campaign season, the party received $500,000, its largest donation in at least 15 years. She also reported state elections officials with strong ties to the Democratic Party agreed to slash that fine of $35,000 down to $15,000 and not pursue criminal charges against the Democratic Party. That donation was listed as coming from a company called Prime Trust, but Borud points out that it actually came from a man named Nisad Singh, who was an executive at the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, and that the party's compliance director knew that. Singh later testified under oath that he knew the money was basically coming from FTX customer funds. FTX was a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed into bankruptcy. The exchange was one of the biggest in the world at the time, allowing customers to trade digital currencies for other digital currencies or for traditional money. Its leader, Sam Bankman-Fried, faces federal fraud and conspiracy charges. By the way, he has pled not guilty. The fact that the Democratic Party accepted the huge donation without reporting the true identity of the person giving it, well, that's a problem. Political campaigns must identify true identity of the person giving them the money. The Democratic Party eventually did that, but only after the Oregonians started asking questions and after the deadline for filing a corrected transaction report. And by the way, here's an interesting twist in all this. The Oregon Elections Director, who is the supervisor of the investigator on the case, is named Molly Woon. She worked for 3 years for the Democratic Party as its communications director and deputy director. The paper reports that now disgraced and former Secretary of State Shemia Fagan said Woon did not need to step away from this case because Fagan had faith in her professionalism and integrity. A spokesman said Woon got regular updates on the investigation and settlement discussions, but that the investigator on the case and legal counsel actually cut the final deal with the Democratic Party. The Secretary of State's office initially fined the Democratic Party $35,000 for misreporting the source of the contribution, but the party pushed back, and the night before a hearing on the issue, the Secretary of State's office cut the fine to $15,000 and did not pursue criminal charges. The acting Secretary of State, Cheryl Myers, approved that settlement. She also issued a statement saying oversight agreements with the Democrats will serve the public interest and hold the DPO accountable in the future. The executive director for the Democratic Party said in a written statement that the case boiled down to an individual lying about a donation and the Democrats correcting it as soon as they found out. Which brings another interesting question and twist in all this. Remember that donor, Mr. Singh? Well, he testified under oath that the money he was sending out as campaign contributions was effectively from FTX customer funds. And just last month, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York sent the Oregon Democratic Party a letter telling them the Department of Justice has cause to believe the $500,000 represents the proceeds of Samuel Bankman-Fried's crimes, which made me wonder, is the Democratic Party going to give that money back to the victims? Well, the party's executive director said they take this issue very seriously and they're coordinating with federal authorities, but otherwise they have no comment. Okay, here's my opinion on this. First, if the Democratic Party is going to give the money back to the victims since it came from that crooked scheme that ripped off real people, come on, that ought to be pretty easy to say, yes, we're going to send the money back to the victims. I think it's a little concerning that they don't seem to be able to say that right now. Second, I don't think I've ever met the current elections director, but let's assume that she has amazing integrity. She probably does. And let's assume that supervising an investigation into the place you used to work as the deputy director is all above board. And let's assume that cutting a fine by more than half is routinely done. Still, why would you ever want the appearance of a conflict of interest like this? This is Oregon's Director of Elections. The office needs to be squeaky clean. This is a time that elections are under extra scrutiny here in Oregon and around the country, a time like no other. That office and the people running it should have the highest integrity and the lowest conflict of interest. You should not even have an appearance of a conflict of interest there. Think I'm being too harsh? Okay, try it out. This weekend, when you're with your friends, tell them the former deputy director of the Democratic Party, now the leader of Oregon's elections, supervised an investigation into that party where the fine was eventually reduced from $35,000 to $15,000. But hey, nothing to see here. It's all above board. Everything's fine. And then let me know how long they laugh before they ask if you're serious. Governor Kotek needs to take action here. She needs to clean up that office. She needs to appoint a Secretary of State soon, which she has said she would do after today's election. And that person needs to really restore trust immediately. Until that happens, a cloud of suspicion is going to hang over the elections office at a time when we need only clear skies. That's my opinion anyway. And you don't have to agree. But what's yours? Email me, will you? Send it to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5652. 5090. I look forward to hearing from you. Up next on the story, the Republican walkout in the Oregon Senate hit day 11 today, with another senator joining the list of those with at least 10 unexcused absences. Measure 113 bars them from holding office in the term following their current term. But could they still run for office? We're diving into the measure's language and getting clarification from the Secretary of State's office. What could be the next voter-approved measure battleground? When the story returns. Hey, just a quick correction before we dive into this next story. My math's not that great. I said it was 123 years old, that building that was built in 1910. Thank you for all who emailed in. It's 113 years old. Appreciate your math skills. Now to the Oregon legislature, where the GOP walkout continues. Republicans have stopped all the work in the state Senate because most are refusing to show up. They're protesting over a bill involving abortion and transgender services and a second bill involving gun rights. Republicans tell me the Democrats are not negotiating. The Democrats tell me the Republicans have not said what they want to end the stalemate. So there's that. In the meantime, the Senate continues to wait quietly with no work being done there. This is day 11 of the boycott. There has been some communication. Senate Republican leader Tim Knopp told Democrats that Republicans would end their walkout to pass budgets that are substantially bipartisan and bills that are constitutional. That's sort of coded talk for, hey, set aside those bills that we hate and we'll vote on everything else. It actually has been done before, by the way. Back in 2019, it was done to end a similar Republican walkout. Then Senate President Peter Courtney agreed to kill 2 or 3 bills on the Republicans really did not like. They included cap and trade, which limited carbon emissions. In return, the Republicans did come back to the Senate and voted for budgets and bills that kept the state working. But this time, the Democrats are rejecting Knopp's offer. They've said House Bill 2002, which involves allowing children younger than 14 to get an abortion without their parents' permission, and mandatory insurance coverage for transgender care. The Democrats have said that is not up for discussion. It will not be changed. It will not be killed. So at least for now, a 2019-style compromise is not a possibility. That has led some to question whether Democrats are even negotiating in good faith. In the meantime, we're digging into the meaning of Measure 113, which voters passed last year by a large margin to avoid walkouts like this. Measure 113 says that lawmakers who have 10 or more unexcused absences cannot hold office in the following term once their current term ends. What you're looking at is the exact wording in the Oregon Constitution that was added thanks to Measure 113. It does not actually say they are prohibited from running for office. See that? But the Secretary of State's office argues it's a qualification issue. They put out a statement reading, if a candidate is not eligible to hold office, the filing officer cannot allow them to be on the ballot. And by the way, that is different from the explanatory statement issued with the initiative when voters passed it to change the law last year. That statement said if someone reached that 10 absence threshold, they could still run and win the election the following term, but they could not actually hold office and serve in the legislature. Secretary of State's office argues that court rulings have supported their position that the lawmaker in question could not even run for election. But Independent Senator Brian Boquist, one of the 4 lawmakers with 10 skips, has said the Elections Division has no authority on the absence clause of the Oregon Constitution. They will avoid it completely. The first day a legislator can file to run in this next election is September 14th, and Boquist's seat is up for 2024. That means he's going to need to file if he wants to run. So time will tell if he actually makes it onto the ballot, or if the Secretary of State's office wins and keeps him off. So far, 3 Republicans have joined Boquist with 10 unexcused absences. They are Senator Dan Bonham of the Dalles, Senator Dennis Lithicum of Klamath Falls, and today Senator Cedric Hayden of Fall Creek hit absence number 10. Following our story last night on the GOP walkout, you were quick to fill our email and voicemail boxes with messages like this.
These lawmakers we have in Salem, who pays them? I think you and I do. If they're doing this crap, if I didn't show up for work after 10 days, I'd be fired. It's totally ridiculous. These guys ought to just be fired. Start from scratch. Ridiculous.
And Mike told us democracy has been described as 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for lunch. In this case, the sheep are not showing up. We spent some time today and last night talking about how Republicans have signals that they could challenge Measure 113 in court. And several of you agree with a viewer named Christina who left us this voicemail.
It is absolutely ridiculous that they are going to fight something that we as Oregonians voted on, which was if you're out for 10 days, bye. They have to realize that we voted on that. Do your job, and like you said, there has to be some compromise going on within the state, and obviously nothing's happening.
Yep, that's true. In a little editorial of my own, I talked about how compromise should rule the day in the legislature. One way to do that would be if the Oregon Senate was made up of representatives from each county. Now, yes, I hear those of you yelling that the U.S. Supreme Court already said no to that idea several decades ago, but for the sake of argument, it is an option, but a few of you simply said, nah, I'm wrong.
While your comments about compromise seem like they make sense on the surface, it's kind of like giving your kid a cookie when he has a tantrum because he can't have his cookie. If you reinforce the behavior, then the behavior is going to continue. No, we should not compromise because they walk out. Compromise in the process to get the bill to the floor, yes. Compromise in the leaders' offices before it gets to the floor, yes. But compromise because they throw a tantrum, hell no.
All right, thank you for that. Greg wrote to us, if Senate Republicans want to pass laws, they need to get a majority of Oregonians to vote for them and not obstruct the will of those who haven't. We need a new ballot measure to make the quorum a simple majority of the Senate, and I'm betting we'll get it. Sooner the better. And perhaps that is on the horizon, Greg, but it won't help the situation as it stands right now. The chamber of the Oregon legislature once again stalled and deadlocked with a lot of business left on the table, including the budget, and just over a month left in the session. Coming up next on the story, why the feds say a former Lake Oswego business operated in a Ponzi-like fashion. Plus, what the jury decided when it came to the 3 former executives at that company facing more than 24 charges. Guilty or not guilty? It was a 6-week slog of a trial, but we have a verdict. Details when the story returns.
Straight ahead at 6:30, fire swallows a Southwest Portland apartment building. Here are the stories of those who escaped and lost nearly everything. Also ahead, Rip City beats the odds with the ping pong balls, you might say, falling somewhat in their favor. Find out which pick they landed in the NBA draft lottery. Plus an update on that massive slide on the road to Mount St. Helens, what it means for the observatory's summer season. That's next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
It's being called the largest white-collar criminal case in Oregon history. After a 6-week federal trial and 3 days of jury deliberations in downtown Portland, 3 former executives of Lake Oswego-based Equitas Capital Management were found guilty on multiple charges that could land them behind bars for decades. Each got nailed with 28 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud, though they were all found not guilty of conspiracy to commit money laundering. So why should you care? Well, the trial was not bickering over chump change. We're talking about $300 million in a fraud conspiracy. This is a story that our partners at the Portland Business Journal have been following every step of the way, and it's no doubt incredibly complicated. But we talked with reporter Jonathan Bach to help us understand what was going on in court and what led to the downfall of a company that at one time, in the not so distant past, employed a lot of people and had a lot of assets.
At its height, it had between 150 and 200 employees. It had 2 corporate jets and approximately $1 billion of assets under management.
And so that was our reporter there who was catching us up on the case. This has gone on in downtown Portland for quite a while, and again, it was one of the biggest white-collar cases in the state of Oregon, so that was the business model. And as you heard, business was actually going pretty well, but then Equitas expanded into the realm of student loans and got involved with a for-profit college called Corinthian Colleges to the tune of about $200 million. And then things started to get pretty messy.
But an important person was Robert Jesnick. He was one of the 3 original directors of this company called JMW Capital Partners. Fast forward, 2005, JMW changes its name to Equitas Capital Management. And it moves into this new business of credit receivables, where it buys debt at a discount using investor money and then collects from debtors and makes money on that sort of spread. So let's say I buy money from, a hospital, or I buy debt from a hospital at 80% of its value. And then I go to the person who owes the hospital bill and I say, let's hash out a payment plan, and you'll pay me back 100% of that money. So then Equitas, in its business model, is supposed to make, that 20% is where it makes its money. And it brings in theory, investor money to sort of pay for that line of business. And it's a lucrative business for a time.
Okay, so maybe that more clearly explains the business model. They're buying debt at a discount and then trying to get as much of that as they can. And as he mentioned, business was going really well. They had a couple of jets, $1 billion under management, but then they got involved with Corinthian colleges and things really started to go south.
But in 2014, Corinthian defaulted. Federal regulators had gotten involved and had cracked down on the schools. It had some predatory practices, Corinthian colleges did. But Equitas still had massive obligations, especially to its prior investors. And so as this chaos ensues, basically where Equitas executives got into trouble is that they continued to tell investors that their money would go to these receivables, is what they were called, those investments were called, while instead, as prosecutors alleged, the executives were using much of that money for paying back prior investors and for operating expenses of Equitas, which is not good.
Yeah, you might be saying, that does kind of sound a lot like a Ponzi scheme. And guess what? The feds agree. So you would think the case is pretty cut and dry, but well, with these white collar financial crimes, never that easy. Remember, the trial lasted 6 weeks. That's a long time. There were a lot of witnesses, and because there were 3 defendants, each one of their lawyers was allowed to cross-examine those witnesses. So you can see why it all took so long. But yesterday, the jury came back with mostly guilty verdicts that we told you about up at the top, and they will all be sentenced in September. As far as the consequences are concerned, they're big. They face millions of dollars in fines and decades potentially behind bars. Other former Equitas executives who previously pled guilty to similar charges will also have to pay restitution to their victims. So that's very possible in this case as well. We think this quote from the IRS agent in Seattle sums up the case pretty well. Strictly speaking, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul is not illegal. However, lying to Peter for personal financial gain and then not paying Paul is definitely criminal. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. And by the way, in case you forgot, there's a special election going on today. Ballots are due by 8 p.m. or they have to be postmarked with today's date in order to be counted. You want that, right? Stick around now for the news at 6:30 and team coverage on that big apartment fire in Southwest Portland. In the meantime, I'll see you right back here tomorrow.